Thank you, Lionel, for the invitation. Thank you also, Mathieu, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce the album project today, to consider also the way that painters could play with gold. And that would be the topic essentially of the talk. I will also try to introduce the different methods that we used in the project album to characterize the gilded surfaces. Although I'm not a chemist, I'm not a physicist, so I apologize in advance for any mispresentation of the diagrams. So the idea of the album project is born essentially from the way that gold is considered in art history, because when we think of Renaissance painting, we don't think of gold. And this is something very fundamental to the project. It's that gold has often been described by art historians from the beginning of the discipline with Leon Battista Berti and Giorgio Vasari to the present day as something that is essentially related to the medieval times. And in the Renaissance, painters introducing and generalizing the use of oil painting, of glazes, were expected to imitate gold and its optical effects rather than use it. So the doxa is that gold is something medieval and not something that we can find in the early modern time. And this is something that has been, of course, presented by Alberti in his De Pictura, where it is interesting to see that he does not praise the use of gold, and that he complains actually about the optical effects that can't be controlled. We see in a plane panel with a gold ground that some planes shine where they ought to be dark and are dark where they ought to be light. And this is very interesting for us because it means also that the optical properties of this material were very much understood by painters of the time. And the fact that these optical properties could not be controlled enough with a metallic surface led also to new ways of imitating the effect of gold. And so the idea has been that gold was essentially replaced by the artist's skill. And this is what Baxander tells us in his also seminal book, which leads us to today, to the consideration that is very widely accepted that gold is something archaic and that gold is something retardataire, that is to say something that is old-fashioned. And the fact that some paintings in the 16th century, in the 17th century were using gold has not been seen. And art historians have been blind to the presence of gold in painting because of this historiographic panorama, but also because of the way that paintings are exhibited nowadays in museums, where reflections are to be diminished at the best, and specular reflection in particular. And when you go through a museum, you actually don't see the gold in paintings. And for many artworks in the project, art historians have been very surprised that actually we were able to assume the use of gold in these artworks. So this is the basis of the album project that was launched by Robin Thomas from the University Paris-Nanterre. And this project associates an interdisciplinary team. So we have academic art historian, we have also curators, also conservators, who are very helpful also to help us understand the techniques, as well as a team of physical chemists at the LAMS, Sorbonne Université, a team of opticians with Christine Andro at the CRC, and also Anne Lyonnais and Lionel Simoneau, as well as a team of data scientists to help us build the database that would be the main delivery of the project. So the project is separated in 4 working packages that are meant to be interdisciplinary. So the first one is very much about art history questions, but also museography questions of how to exhibit gold and how to understand gold in the museum context. The second project is about the historical materials and the techniques that are used in buildings in collaboration between art historians and physical chemists. And the third main working packages is about the diachronic study of the appearance of gilding, not only today, but also in an historical approach of understanding the way that paintings with gold were exhibited at the time of their creation. So I will begin with a short presentation of the way that we try to characterize the presence of gold in painting. And for art history, it is very much an hypothesis, in a hypothetical manner of doing, because we have not the means and the finances to analyze each painting of the corpus. So it's essentially about learning to distinguish gold from imitation by pigments and other metals that we use to imitate gold. So the first working package is about mostly building this corpus of painting and also questioning it in different approaches. And so far we have gathered around 2,000 artworks, which also helps to see that we cannot properly analyze in a physical manner or in an optical manner each of these artworks. So most of the corpus has been identified maybe with only eye recognition. And so we spend actually most of our times in museums because we can't really shift the work. We can shift the head, but we mainly shift the body around artworks to try to catch the specular reflections in order to also be able to see the gold. And what you see on the left is a panel which you have the image that is, of course, the image that is available on the net, which also means that we cannot work from database, we cannot work from online approaches. We have to go see the artworks in order to be able to catch the reflection of these gilded surfaces. So this has allowed us to also consider the way that gold and its uses change over time. So these three artworks we have use of gold, which is not as visible for each one of them. So for instance, the Rembrandt artwork, you have a copper that is a gilded copper and that has been covered with paint. And later on, the hair of the beard were scratched in the sculpture technique in order to reveal the underneath gold layer on the copper. Here you have this use of gold on the brocades decorating the church. And in the Vermeer, the use of gold is limited to the reflection of light on the nails of the chair. And this is a very tiny detail, which actually you can't really see even in this picture. And so you see that what is interesting for us in terms of artistry is to understand why painters, while they were absolutely capable of imitating gold, somehow found the need to use gold leaf in their painting. And we assume, it's of course a main hypothesis of work, that it is because specifically of its optical properties and some things that you cannot really imitate or find with pigments. And so this is the approach actually of our project. So in order to understand these techniques and in order to better appreciate the way that we can recognize them also in painting, we are working very closely with our physical chemist team. We are also working on several aspects of textual documentation. So technical sources of art, which includes recipes, which includes also written and archival sources that allow us to understand the way that techniques were to be made. And these techniques are also reconstructed with our conservator team. So especially Marie Dubost, who is a conservator of gilded wood and who works a lot with us in order to reconstruct these techniques on mockups. And we will see later that these mockups are also used for optical analysis. So the idea about the techniques is that gilding techniques are mostly known for the medieval period. And we do not have any publication on gilding techniques, in the 17th or late 16th century, while it's a period where the technical approaches of painting are changing, because it's a period where canvas becomes the main support for painting. It's a period where you have new supports such as slab, marble, also copper, that become very essential supports for painters. And so the idea is to understand the way that these techniques could have evolved or developed through time. So we use archives. We use also archives of laboratories, and especially museum laboratories, in order to benefit from previous study that had been done on paintings. As has been said concerning heritage artifacts, we are not free to do invasive approaches, so we cannot scratch the painting a bit in order to do the analysis. So we have essentially non-invasive approaches. So let's have first a bit of a recap on these gilding techniques, because what we see is that actually these gilding techniques are associated with distinct optical effects, and these optical effects are apparently known by painters who use them often in combination in order to articulate the visual properties of their artworks. So the first and most well-known technique is water gilding. Water gilding that is applied on a ground with a bowl that is made essentially of clay, but it's not always a bowl. The fact is that it's an assiette, that is a layer preparatory to the laying of the gold leaf, that is humidified with water, which makes it an aqueous binder, hence the water gilding, dorure à la tétrempe in French. And so the leaf is then laid on this bowl, and the advantage of water gilding is that it's burnishable, and you can burnish it with an agate stone to make it more brilliant, to have a very much more specular reflection. But not all water gilding surfaces are burnished, because it's essentially a choice of the painter and of the effect that is sought to achieve. The other main technique with gold leaf is modern gilding, that is a gilding on an oil-based assiette. And this mordant allows for the leaf to stick to the ground. It allows also to have mordant applied on a very thin surfaces. And the fact is that this modern gilding cannot be burnished. So it's the main difference that also has an impact on the way that these different gilding surfaces appear afterwards. Hence, a distinction between water gilding as something that is bright and burnished and very much more specular, and on the other hand, modern gilding that is a matte gilding that does not appear with the same properties as water gilding. A third approach is actually not really a third technique. It's actually playing on the nature of the leaf that is applied, because with shell gold, the gold, is not applied in leaves. It is applied in powder, a powder that is mixed with an Arabic gum, and this allows to paint actually with gold powder directly onto a binder that can be of very different nature. The fact that shell gold is applied with brush implicates that it's often used with a very thin modeling, because you can really paint and so have this very powder effect on the surface of the painting. And it's named shell gold because this mixture of powdered gold with Arabic gum was often conserved in small shells, as you can see here, which is why it is named shell gold from very early on. Now, if we try to see how this technique can be differentiated in painting, well, water gilding, especially when it's burnished, is easily recognizable from the specular reflection that you can get from seeing the surface in different conditions. Water gilding is also often recognizable by the red ball, and since the gold leaf is very fragile, you often have this red impression underneath. And you can often see the red ball, which is a strong indication in favor of water gilding on gold. On the other hand, the modern gilding is mostly recognizable by its somehow darker color, because often the oil would oxide underneath, and it's also recognizable because the oil would crack. And so you would have these craquelures, these cracks that are very much more visible on modern gilding than there are on water gilding. On the other hand, shell gold offers the ability of having very narrow lines of gilding. And so what you have here is the detail of an armor that is drawn with shell gold in order to represent a motif. And this is absolutely not possible with modern gilding or water gilding. So to have this very thin approaches, to have also this very delayed manner of laying the gold, it must be shell gold that was employed by the painters. Now, on top of these three techniques, you also have a vast range of finishes, a vast range of working of the surface that can be applied. Either it be in the practice of the burnishing that can be done in very different degrees, or in the application of reliefs. So you can have negative reliefs with punchworks that are actually scratching, playing on the surface in order to apply a specific pattern. Here in the halo, for instance. You can also have incisions that are very just narrow lines cut into the gold leaf. And what is very interesting for us is also all the positive reliefs, which can be of very varying density, because, for instance, the Bastiglia here is a model of the preparatory ground underneath that can create a real relief that is later gilded. You can also have sgraffito, which implies to cover the gold surface with paint and then to scratch in order to reveal the gold underneath. And you can also have glazes, which allows to color the gold leaf. And these glazes are more or less opaque and allow also for a great variety of effects. You can also have coral varnishes, which are very much more difficult to identify because it's very difficult to see the original varnishes, and it's also very difficult to differentiate original varnishes from later varnishes. And finally, you can also apply shell gold on top of gold leaf. So these are all kind of variations that are very interesting also in terms of what they bring to the aspect of these building surfaces. And the matter actually that is below the leaf is also very important, because painters often worked the preparatory ground in order to obtain very specific effects. And this is the case here with this Madonna by Bernardino Fungi, where you have this narrow, very regular punchwork of the leaf that is obtained actually by modeling the preparatory ground with a roulette. I'm sorry, I don't have the English for that. Here is the Bastiglia that I was referring to that allows to create very much more important reliefs that are often also associated with glazes, for instance, to imitate the aspects of a stone incrusted in a crown or in all frames. We also have this kind of decoration of the surface with preparatory ground that is modeled underneath with linear cuts that allows to have this very strange impression actually of different levels in the surface of the gildings. So associated with this way of recognizing and also trying to identify the gilding surfaces in artworks, we also perform a few analyses, especially XRF analyses that were achieved in specific museums such as the Louvre, the Musée de Colmar, or the Musée de Dijon, with a portable device that allowed us to access to the elemental composition of these paintings. But of course, when you do XRF, you have all the density, all the layers that are under the fiber are to appear later on the results. So you have to distinguish them, and this allows, for instance, here to identify the fact that here we have a composition of the gold halo of Saint Anna that is different from that of the Virgin, and which supports the idea that that of the Virgin was restored afterwards. So it can also help to identify different processes and different steps in the life of the artwork. Regarding optics, with all the analysis that have been done, we also have a similar approach that associates an approach of working on reconstruction of techniques and working also on artworks in museums. So the objectives of the optics group is mainly to study these optical properties of the gold surface of the gilding technique, sorry, and to link it with optical properties. So I won't go back on that, but of course, in our case, the roughness of the surface of the gilding is very important to the optical effect that we can achieve, that we can also measure on artworks. And so we have also journalism analysis on also the nature and the coloration of the gold based also on its purity. But the question with gloss is, of course, how to identify gloss when we cannot have a sample. And so what has been proposed is to quantify gloss with the ratio between the specular reflection and the diffuse reflection in order to have an idea of what is the gloss of these different gilding surfaces and gilding techniques without being able to work on samples. So a portable device has been conceived by Manutech there also to understand and analyze the way that these surfaces can appear in museums. And these museums have been, this device has been, for instance, used in Colmar in order to analyze some artworks. And the fact is that when we work on artworks, it's very difficult because these artworks are not well conserved, and especially the gilding surfaces are very fragile. And none of the gilding surfaces in artworks in museums today or elsewhere are actually in the state of their original conservation. So the fact is that the surface state is very incoherent, that we also have to find large areas that are homogeneous. And because the gilding evaluates in such a specific way, it's also very difficult to obtain theoretical models based on artworks. So the idea is rather more to analyze simplified models, and these simplified models are related also to the quantum samples that were produced by Marie Dubost, based on these different techniques that we know of, based on what we learned from the recipes, and based also on the practice of conservators who are used also to duplicate and imitate the way that paintings were made from ancient times. So you have here the set of eprouvettes of markups. What you can see is, of course, that the specular and diffuse reflection are very different based on the nature of the gilding, based on the nature of the ball, based also on the finish of the surface, either it be burnished or varnished, for instance. So these mockups have been analyzed both with the portable device and with the lab, essentially with the spectrophotometer Claris 5000. And this analysis allows us to also have a glimpse of the way that these different techniques have an effect on the way that the surfaces react to light. So, for instance, with burnished water gilding, we have a very high peak of specular reflection that is much lower with unburnished surfaces. We compared also when the gilding surfaces in water gilding is burnished or only varnished, when it is not burnished, when it is not burnished and varnished, in order to grasp also the way that burnishing really has a very strong effect on the specular reflection. Regarding modern gilding, the specular reflection is very much lower. So you have it in orange. While the diffuse reflection is much higher. And so it allows us to simplify the models in terms of, well, burnished water gilding has a very specular reflection, and modern gilding has a very diffuse reflection. A distinct approach is that of shell gold, because shell gold, as it is applied with a brush, often reveals the underlayer that is most of the time pigmented, so we don't have the same surface that is opaque. And so here, of course, the reflection, both diffuse and specular, is much lower than what we can have with other building techniques. So this has been also applied on EZ contrasts. And to sum up, we have these large groups, finally, of either diffuse or specular reflections with a possibility of confusion between water gilding that is not burnished and modern gilding, while, of course, water gilding, when it is burnished, is very much recognizable. So this also allows us, in terms of art history, when we go to museums, to have a much more precise assertion of what techniques may have been used in each paintings, because, of course, these technical properties are very much associated with the different techniques, and so we have this array of techniques that produce different effects, and this also allows us to better understand the way that these paintings were gilded. So right now, the optics group is also working on associating what has been done in the physical chemic group, for instance, in Dijon, with the analysis of 1,000 artworks in the musée, and also to approach the question of glazed buildings with these new mock-ups that are covered here with red lake in different thickness and different concentration, as it is a technique that we often found in painting of the time. And so it's interesting to see also what is the effect on these questions. Now, regarding display of appearances, what is interesting from my art history perspective is that actually these different techniques associated with different visual properties also appear in documentation, because in contracts for paintings and altarpiece paintings in the 1500s, for instance, we have a distinction between specific parts and motifs that have to be done with matte gold or that have to be done with burnished gold. And so this kind of documentation tells us also that painters had a clear appreciation of the optical effects of these techniques, and that these techniques were also combined in order to enhance also the visual dimensions of this painting. And what is interesting with this approach is actually that these optical dimensions of artworks is something that we don't really consider in art history in a more widely manner. And so the idea is also to try to understand the way that painters thought about the different reaction to light of their artworks throughout these different techniques. So here are a few examples, for instance, of combination of these techniques that allows for a new approach also of the way that these paintings had to be seen and the way that their gilding surfaces had to be appreciated. And so, for instance, in this Pietà, you have a combination between ground that is gilded in a water gilding on red ball. Here you very much see the red ball. This water gilded surface has been worked with punchworks in order to do the halos, and has also been painted with glazes that here depict the Holy Jerusalem in the landscape, and that is inserted on the board surface. And on top of that, we have these rays of the crown of the Christ that are actually done with modern gilding in order to superpose modern gilding over water gilding. A few other examples of these combinations of different gilding surfaces and techniques with these two panels where you have a gold ground that is water gilded with the corners that are that may be done in modern gilding, or that may be done also with a brown varnish applied in order to model actually the corners of the gilded surfaces. But of course, without proper analysis, we can't really tell. And so there is also always a part of hypothesis, especially when we cannot do a proper analysis. What is very interesting also is to see that while gold has been finally by theorists like Leon Battista Alberti described as something that was traded by skill, in the way that medieval painters would have finally given up the gold and ultramarine in order to better enhance their skill. What we see very clearly is that in the Renaissance, painters also approach these techniques of building in a virtuous manner. And it's really the idea that combining techniques, combining these effects is also very demanding. And finally, we can see that it's not something that is archaic. It's not something that is traditional and conventional. So what is very interesting is artworks such as this one, where we have Danae, who becomes pregnant with the rain of gold that is led by Zeus. That is a metaphor of Zeus. And what we have here is a rain of gold that is actually done in 3 different techniques with yellow pigments, with modern gilding, and with shed gold also to have this very powder effect on the robe of Danae. Other examples, for instance, here with Giacomo Penizzetti, where we have this armor that I showed you in detail earlier, where we can really see also different techniques with shed gold, with modern gilding, and also with yellow. And when you turn around painting, you really have this armor that is actually evolving with the light and with the way that you look at it. So it's really another dimension that is actually something that we cannot really see on a picture. It's something that we cannot also consider in the art historical tradition. Now, of course, there's not only gold. And so we also have a combination of gold with imitation of gold. Either they be from other metals, such as silver leaf covered with yellow, or with metals or alloys that are actually not gold, such as mosaic gold, that were also used at the same time. And this is also not new, because, of course, imitating gold is something that is also very much documented in the medieval times, especially for mosaic gold. That is something that was prescribed, that was forbidden in many conventions and rulings. So here you have some reconstruction of this different way of imitating gold. I will be with silver leaf covered with a yellow varnish, tin foil covered also with a yellow varnish, or only with a white brown layer covered with a yellow varnish. So this question of imitating gold and also playing on these appearances in order to convince the beholder that you have actually a motif that is done with gold is something that we also stumbled upon during our visits to museums, because the corpus was assembled essentially from the collections of 200 museums in Europe. And so throughout our visit, we came to this painting that is a Madonna, where we could identify actually 3 areas that appear to be gilded. So we have a star on the mantle, the rays on the behind the head of the Christ, and also the orphrey of the Virgin's robe. But actually, only one of these 3 motifs is made with gold. So these are the rays that were analyzed with a serif by Laurence de Viglay. This is the star that is actually not made with gold, but with brass, yellow brass. That was a very common technique of imitating gold also at the time. And here you see on the serif that we do not have gold coming out. While the orphrey of the mantle was done with mosaic gold, that is sulfur of tin. And here you have on the orphrey of the Virgin, this mosaic gold that is used. And this is very interesting because mosaic gold is often described in documents as something that you cannot use to substitute gold, and something that is actually not proper for use in painting. And here it is very much associated with an image of the Virgin. So the question is finally to see to what extent the use and the introduction of imitation techniques in paintings could also be something that is not based on economic purposes. The fact is that these very small motifs do not represent an economical gain, but rather more a way to differentiate these different motifs with the specific optical effects of each of these materials. So mosaic gold here is used, for instance, as substitution to gold. For this version, the National Gallery, we do not have gold, but only mosaic gold that is used in the halo of the version. Here with the cross sample from the archives, it also helps us to identify it. And another instance of this combination of gold and other techniques imitating gold is that of this version by Andrea del Verrocchio, or the master of Leonardo da Vinci. And you have gold for the star ornamental, but for instance, you also have mosaic gold that is used on the orphrase of the sleeves, while yellow pigment is used to imitate the aspect of brocade in the painting. So what we see is that it's really not about economy, it's really not about actually substituting gold with other less expensive materials, but it's also about diversifying this technique and diversifying the effects that it could achieve. Another instance here, final one for this section, is a coronation of the Virgin, where we have this very large array of techniques that are used, but also of metal leaves, because in the mantle of God the Father, we have for these motifs that are visible here, the use of a Swiss gold that is pop gold, actually. So a combination done by the gold beaters of silver leaves beaten all together with gold leaves in a very, very thin thickness. And this part gold is here used only for the offray of God the Father. It is applied on an orange oil mordant and covered with this azurite glaze and black glaze also in order to do the motifs, while the crown is done in gold leaf, water gilded on a red bowl, and the halo of God the Father is done in water gilded only with a red glaze. So you see that in very specific artworks, we have this combination in a very narrow scale of different techniques and different surfaces of metal, which appear to be used all together in order to convey different effects, because we can see how the crown, for instance, is very much more bright even today than the other specific parts of the composition. And finally, the question that appears is how painters also chose, and why did they choose to use gold when they could actually imitate it. And an interesting example here is that of this assumption by Victor Guerard, where you have gold that is used on top of other imitation of gold throughout paint. And gold is used for very specific parts of the composition that actually translate the effects of divine light appearing on the top of the composition. And you have these very small parts of shell gold that have been applied on top of the mantles of the angel, on the right of the angel's wing here, as well as on the collar of St. John here, on very small touches. And this really shows that painters had an intention about the way that these artworks could also translate the light and the lighting effects throughout the compositions. Of course, gold is also used to imitate gold and to represent and to depict gold objects. So this is the case here with these portraits by Hans Wertinger of very golden figures. But what is very interesting here is in the IRR, where you can see very clearly the contour of the leaf, and later covered with paints in order to depict both the fingers and the rings, as well as the stones in green and in red. So it really shows also the way that paintings are made, with also this very clear appreciation of the leaf and how the leaf was also employed directly in the preparation. Other kinds of imitation of these optical effects throughout, for instance, the question of the chains. And chains are really frequent in our corpus, with a lot of chains also associated with sumptuary laws. And here you have, for instance, a portrait where all the gilded jewelry are done with gold, in imitation also of the chains that we can see at the time. The same holds true of the fabrics, and of course of the woven velvet fabrics, done also with gold threads. So an example here is a portrait of Henry VIII, where all the parts of the costume are done with yellow, except for the sleeves, which are done in gold leaf covered with brown varnish, in order to better imitate the aspects of such velvet silk as this one. Now, it's not only about imitating gold objects, it's also about sometimes facilitating the lecture, the narrative approaches of painting. And this is the case here with the panel of the Victory of Charlemagne. And in this very crowded panel, actually, the figure of Charlemagne is the one that stands out through gold, and that allows us a better reading of the painting. I will finish with the Puy of Amiens. That is a very large panel that were meant to be exhibited in the church, where we have gold that is used on specific motifs. So we have gold for the heraldry of the chaplain. We also have gold for the inscription that is the title of the artwork and the subject that was to be interpreted by the painter. And we have gold also for the char of the allegory of the triumph of the faith over heresy, so over Protestants. And so we have the Protestant faith here that is blind, and here the allegory of the church that points out the croissant of the Virgin. And the Virgin is crushing the books, and all these different motifs, in order to be better seen, are painted with gold, as is the case of the chariot of the triumph of victory, that is led by this very nice putty all in gold surface, putty that are very much associated also with the coat of arms of the city of Amiens. So this kind of specific use of gold also helps us to understand the way that gold will also really contribute to the reading of artworks. So to sum up, we can see that there is this continuous use of gold throughout medieval and Renaissance times, that this use of gold is very much also associated with iconographic uses, with specific motifs, but also with an interest from the painters for these optical effects. Regarding optics, we can see that these oil and water gilding techniques can be characterized throughout color and gloss. That also there is an impact of varnish, there is an impact of gold, which I have not presented here. But the finished treatment of the surface is also very important in the way that this painting could have appeared, and the way that these techniques were combined. And that painters were aware actually of these optical effects, which is also very helpful for us in order to better think the way that artworks were to be conceived. We have to understand the optical properties of these gilding techniques. And so finally, we also see that the fact that there were other ways to have a metallic gloss than gold does not appear to have condemned the use of gold in painting. Thank you.